Now, it's almost a month since the federal government of Nigeria activated the COVID-19 lockdown, majorly in 3 states, Lagos, Ogun, and the Federal Capital Territory, Abuja, actually 2 states and the FCT. And the ongoing pandemic is hitting life across nations, toppling economic and political structures in its wake.
Very well said. As the index case in Nigeria continues to rise, curtailing the spread becomes more challenging. Now, the continuous restriction of movement means that working class across the country, close to 80 million people, are definitely heavily affected.
Definitely huge numbers there, Rufai. The plight of health workers in the pandemic has cast a light on an ill-equipped and overburdened public health system that has for years been starved of funds and modern medical facilities.
And joining us now to discuss the economic as well as the political implications of Nigeria's COVID-19 lockdown is Dr. Pedro Obaseki, a public affairs analyst and convener, Midwest Movement, who just turned 53 on Saturday. Thank you so much for joining us, and belated happy birthday to you.
Adeswa and the crew, thank you very much for the
Great to have you. Well, while we wait anxiously to hear what President Muhammadu Buhari's next move would be, the 36 state governors have met and they are proposing interstate lockdown as well as movement within the state with curfews, restrictions to large gatherings. Should these recommendations be agreed to by Mr. President when he finally addresses Nigerians, probably today, do you think this would be Nigeria turning the dial, or will it be flipping the switch, even as numbers continues to rise in the COVID-19 cases?
I definitely would not want to be in the shoes of Mr. President. Neither would I pray to be in the shoes of any of the governors. But it's absolutely time for our leadership to rise up. This shows that we've always thrown up the wrong people to lead us. I've been listening to your analysis since morning, and it is not very pessimistic, to say the least. I, as a person, looking at it not from a political point of view, but just looking at the sheer psychological breakdown, the sheer lack of leadership, I think it is just time for someone, Mr. President and the governors, to take leadership and do so based on the extenuating circumstances on ground. Number one, it appears that nobody was prepared for the pandemic. Nobody was prepared for this. But we can rise up to the occasion, and that is what separates human beings from other bestial animals. So, and if we continue to be using fire brigade approaches, as it were, without taking into total consideration the larger picture, then there may be a problem. Like Lagos has been on lockdown for upwards of, we're in the 2nd month, basically. We've been locked down since the last day or the end of March. Now we are getting into the end of April. And in another few weeks, I don't think Nigeria will be able to survive the coming conflagration. I think Mr. President and his crew and all those involved in policy decisions must take both the macro and the micro implications of a lockdown or a lack of it before they reach a very informed decision. I don't want to make that decision for them, but it is also good for them to look at what is going down in Lagos. I am in Benin. What is going down in Benin? Why are the cases rising astronomically instead of them to go down in spite of the lockdown? Nigerians must be told how and exactly the steps being taken to mitigate this situation. This, unfortunately, has not been done.
All right. I'd like to say, like I just said before, happy birthday to you once again. I mean, you just turned 3 years above half a century, and that's really very exciting.
above a century for the last 3 years.
Above half a century, I should say. All right. So I wanted to talk about this because this is quite very key. There has been a diversion in thoughts of when to open the lockdown vis-a-vis the economic implications and the way it's going. If you heard Boris Johnson speak this morning, he says, let us not jeopardize all the sacrifices we made thus far. That's obviously meaning that they're still going to lock down the economy to a certain extent before all of this pans out. The numbers are ratcheting up big time. We've got over 1,000 now. I'd said that in South Africa, the peak will not come until about August. We don't know where the peak will even come in Nigeria yet.
I can tell you when the peak will come in Nigeria.
No, just hang on a minute. So what should be the approach to this?
That is where the problem is. We have to first appreciate what the implications of whatever approach, what are the implications? It's like modeling. If we do a total lockdown, what are the implications? If there is a partial lockdown, what are the implications? What are the macro and micro implications? What are the political, economic, the sociological, the social, and the worst one, the psychological implications? What are those implications? If you are able to galvanize a people, make them understand that we are in a world war situation, in a situation that seems to be worse than the last world war, that may be worse than even a nuclear explosion being thrown somewhere, then we will begin to appreciate the enormity of what we face. I told some of my friends that the coronavirus pandemic or the COVID-19 problem will just be a reset button for the entire Nigerian nation. It is anyway. We have to look at it. Where is our money? How will you use whatever monies we might have saved if the savings still exist?
Would anything ever change after this? Would you think anything would ever change after this?
Yes. Is that what you?
Do you think anything would ever change after this? Because I've been hearing that narrative too, that it's going to be the reset button for Nigeria. Don't you think it's going to be back to business as usual once this is done?
Let me tell you where the fight will start. Zeni, mark my words this day. I pray it doesn't turn out like that of a Nostradamus. Nigeria is a nation that shares revenue at the end of every month with no saving for the tomorrow. Today, as we have it, since all the revenues that are shared by the FAAC at the end of every month, the revenue allocation or the revenue sharing, what happens is what was earned in March will be shared in May. Taking that into consideration, if our budget was premised on $57 a barrel, and today it is zero bottom, all our oil now, Nigerian oil, for it to be sold, we have to dash it out or pump them into the sea. That is the only way. Now, as of last week Friday, the futures market for oil, for petroleum and oil, crude oil, got to zero. Zero. I don't know whether you understand what that means. It means simply that in another 1 month, absolutely no state in Nigeria will be able to pay simple things as salaries. There will be little or nothing called, there will be nothing to share. Now, this is where the ECA, the SS crude account, which was used in mitigating the 2008-2009 global meltdown, would have come into play. Unfortunately, some governors, which some of them are still in administration today as ministers, made sure that did not happen. We have the sovereign wealth fund. I remember that when we were fighting and screaming with Okonjo-Iweala, it was in the neighborhood of $20 billion. That is a lot of money in Nigerian naira, taking into consideration the total budget for this year, for example. As at the time I checked, I hear it's less than $70 million. Less than 4 to 5% of what it used to be just 5 years ago. We are in a state of what the Igbos call a makalene. we are in trouble. And not to see the economic compound nature of that trouble is a bigger problem. We are a nation of aggregately 200 million people. 200 million. 1% of 200 million is 2 million. 0.1% is 200,000. 0.01% is 20,000. Nigeria has not even reached 2,000, which doesn't even have a decimal in 100%. What that means, we have shut down the economy of the nation. We have shut down a nation where almost 80 to 90% of the entire nation is in the informal sector, not supported by government palliatives, not tied to government earnings. All of you sitting down there now, you don't earn a kobo from government, no pension, no nothing. And all of a sudden, you are locked down. The trader, the man, the Omalanke pusher, everybody is locked down. Some people say if you don't work today, you will not eat tomorrow. But the truth is there are millions of Nigerians who, if they don't work today, will not eat today. Now, what are we creating? We are creating a potent volcano that is waiting to erupt at a moment's prodding. So that is where it is important for our leadership, whatever is left of it, to begin to sit down. Why I say reset button, let me give you one. Nigeria federalism, don't be offended, everything is tight, it's cycle.
Okay, Dr. Obaseki, if I can just come in here, I would like to, when we come back from the break, have your take on the current the partial lockdown situation in Edo State, and how a certain Benin monarch has actually come out to say that it should be a full lockdown. But we're going to go on a quick break now. When we come back, we will continue this conversation. Join us again. Welcome back to the morning show. We're still joined by Dr. Pedro Obaseki, a public affairs analyst and the convener of the Midwest Movement. Now, before the break, you were going to land on a point before I asked you my next question. If you may proceed.
Oh, thank you very much, because I said by next week, when they hold their next revenue allocation of FAAC meeting, there will be nothing to share. That is going to be the beginning of the crisis. Why this is so is that every month, we all know about the 13% revenue derivation, resource derivation. We all know that the Nigerian nation is the only skilled fiscal federalism that we all know. We all know that the Nigerian nation is the only nation on earth that is a federal nation that shares what it does not generate. Today, the major problem we are going to face is the fact that we discarded the federal fiscal arrangement, which used to be 50, 30, 20, where the states keep 50% of all revenues accruable from it. Can you imagine if Lagos, that has so much, will keep 50% of what it earns? Lagos will be in a better position to fight the pandemic today. Now, 30% is put in the federation account, which is shared pro rata according to size and demography, population, and others. Then 20% to the federal government. But today, the Nigerian federal government is working like reverse osmosis, a reverse pyramid. So today, all the monies are in Abuja. So people are fleecing away the wealth. Today or tomorrow, there will be nothing to share. So I expect the first fisticuffs to start in the Committee of Governors along with the FAAC, while trying to share a now non-existent revenue for the country. It means that for the states to survive at all in the next 2 months, the federal government must relieve itself of a huge portion of its own share of the federal allocation. Once that is done, the states might be able to pay the next salary. And what that will have done is that Nigeria would have reset itself by default. Or let's say it could put itself in a corona reset. Now, that is the main problem. The pandemic is not a health crisis because so far, the coronavirus pandemic or the COVID-19 has not affected even close to 0.0001% of Nigerians. 2,000 cases at least reported, or thereabout, under 2,000. Meanwhile, we are 200 million. I don't know whether that is 200 million. That is a lot. But we know today that they've shot persons in Warri. We know today that there are videos all over social media of people attacking food convoys. We know today that people are going to die. People are already dying from a pandemic-induced hunger.
Okay, Dr. Obaseki, if I can come in here, I would like to get your opinion. I mean, on the 10th of April, the governor did, in fact, say that there was going to be a 10-day partial lockdown. And against the advice of Oba Eware II, he said that maybe the Edo State government should be looking at a full lockdown and should be following the directives as we're seeing in the Federal Capital Territory, in Lagos and in Ogun State. Now, with currently 22 confirmed cases in Edo State, what is your take on this? Do you think that at this point, Edo State should be looking at a full lockdown? And also, why do you think it was not included in the presidential lockdown order?
Okay. I think those who made it, I will start from the bottom. Those who made the decision not to include Edo are 22. 22. Edo, if you look at it, I mean, the arithmetic don't lie. As at the time the president was doing the lockdown, I think that was March 30th or 29th or thereabout, on Lagos, Ogun, and Abuja, Edo had about 9 as at then. Now, if you look at the graph, almost a month later, Edo has increased by less than 11 or 12. In that same period, Lagos has increased by more than 600 or 700.
Well, wouldn't you say that has to do with the amount of testing being done in Lagos in comparison to Edo State?
So then don't make judgments out of ignorance. Edo State is even the first state to start full mobile door-to-door testing. They are doing full mobile testing. That was launched about a week ago. And it is that full door-to-door mobile testing that has started in Oredo, which is the Benin City, that has brought the increment. Of all the states in Nigeria, let's be frank, prior to the coronavirus pandemic, Edo State could be said to be one of the very few that was already ready for something like this without knowing it. Because of the Ebola cases, the Ebola crisis, Edo State already had isolation centers in at least each of the senatorial districts. Edo State had testing equipment already at Irua, at the specialist hospital in Irua. So we already were a little, you can say, prepared. Now, the governor, from his explanation, which makes sense, is an enclave surrounded by all of the states. Lagos has lockdown. 90% of eastbound traffic coming in from the west into Edo State, 90% is from Lagos. Ondo, lockdown. Ondo is the entire stretch of the eastern border of Edo State. Delta, lockdown. Delta covers Edo State in a half moon. And then Abuja, which is separated from Edo State by just Kogi, lockdown. So Edo, without pronouncing a lockdown, was already locked down. Are you getting my point, ma'am?
Yes, sir.
Edo was locked down. So on the other hand, you look at a state where only 10% is in structured employment. And the governor felt that if I decide not to allow the little micro economic activity to go on, because by calculation, if all the states around us are already locked down, not allowing any infiltration or entrance from any other parts of the nation into Edo State, it means that the situation in Edo State as at the time of the lockdown is the status quo. So there will be no more influx. The planes are not flying. The borders are closed. So there will be no extra influx from Lagos, which is our principal destination, or from Abuja, or from the east. All the eastern and all the southeastern states, south states, Port Harcourt, and everybody must pass through Delta to enter Benin. So if Delta is on a full martial lockdown, it means that the Beninese are, I'm in Benin now by default. My family is in Lagos. I couldn't cross over before the lockdown. So I'm here, trapped here in Benin City. I'm talking to you now from my village home. So that is what the situation is. Okay. And we understand, in my state, 90%, almost 90% of the total economic activity is outside of the structures of government, is informal. So the only way is so as not to create a COVID-19, a hunger-induced virus disease or whatever, pandemic. That was why he said, okay, since nobody is coming in now with a virus, we can now contend with what is here, lift up the ante, all the isolation centers that is showcased on TV to all of us every day. Now, I hope you know that in the evening, we are on total lockdown because Benin and Edo, we like to enjoy ourselves. So that has been totally shut down.
Dr. Obaseki, I'd like to make reference to two things you've said at two different times in the course of this conversation so far. And one is leadership, and the other is the federalism being practiced in Nigeria. But first, let's talk about leadership. In a time of crisis such as this, people look up to leadership, and it's beyond making speeches. Do you think that this crisis poses a threat to the popularity of political leaders and political parties in Nigeria? And for instance, in a state like Edo and Ondo, who are going for elections this year, and then the general elections in 2023, do you think that the reaction of leadership so far poses a threat to what that dynamic may be? And then secondly, on federalism, I know you've talked generally that this has shown a faulty system, but I want to be specific. For instance, the interesting scenarios playing out in Rivers State, where we see the governor arresting oil workers who are carrying out national duty at the time of lockdown. In some other areas, governors have decided to lock down their borders. Many say that's not in their jurisdiction. And then in some others, in like Kano State, you see the deportation of Amajuris, which are known as street beggars in the northern part of Nigeria. What does this truly say about the federalism, and how do we go forward from there?
You have answered your question. What you've just thrown up is are all analogous analogies of a failing system or a failing system. Nigeria right now is beginning to behave like a dead state, just underwaiting an undertaker, just waiting for an undertaker. Now, all the governors doing what they are doing is as a result of a lack of leadership at the top. We are here, you scream daily. Pardon me, I hope they don't arrest me. If they do, so be it. I am here. I know more of what Donald Trump wants to say. I know more of what Boris Johnson says, even from his sick bed, under quarantine, under lockdown, why he is suffering from the virus. I know what the president of Ghana says than I know about mine, in spite of the fact that if we use arithmetic, our population alone will scare everybody. I know. So the issue of that crisis is a self-inflicted one, not by our constitution or federalism.
A self-inflicted crisis, Dr. Obaseki, do pardon me. We're going to break and we'll be back to talk some more about the solutions. Join us again. Welcome back to the Morning Show here on the Rise News. We still have joining us all the way from Benin City, the Edo State capital, Dr. Pedro Obaseki, a public affairs analyst and convener, Midwest Movement. Thank you so much for staying with us, Dr. Obaseki. You are responding to my question about leadership and federalism in Nigeria.
Yes. I just said quickly that I think it is high time that our president and those in federal authority step up to the game. They must step up their game. I don't want to seem to indict anybody, but the president is the president of Pedro. So I must know what the president is trying to do over saving my children. The president must tell me how I can mitigate this crisis. The president must tell me how, by leading from the front. Is a war. And our president is a war general. So to even think about it, I will say this in the public domain. I wrote a message to the former governor of Lagos State, whom I am proud to say I worked for. I said, Your Excellency, what manual did we use in confronting Ebola? Because I remember vividly. I say, sir, whatever that manual is, please give it to your colleagues. I wrote that to Babatunde Raji Fashola because he led from the front then. And I knew, even in spite of the fact that the federal government was PDP-led and the Lagos state government was APC-led. At the point, we must understand, now a governor in the north expels almanjaris. I'm not an almanjari, but he expelled persons who are bona fide citizens of this country. All of a sudden, the governor of River State, so it has gone beyond party. These two persons are in very different, they are on opposing side of the political spectrum. He is shutting down places that are federal on the exclusive list. But the first thing is to protect your people. You cannot legislate the environment in Abuja or in Idumagbo or in Okesuno or in Ajangbadi, on Sabongidaura or on Okene, or legislate it in a place in Irwe-Lugbo in Delta State or Ikakbramen. You can't do that. So the local leaders, the state governors, they have shown a lot more leadership than the federal one. Let's be frank with ourselves. In spite of whatever, this is not political. What I am scared of for them is that the political elite of this country has failed in a mammoth test that has stretched their limitations. It has exposed, let me use the Yoruba word. It is when the wind blows that you see the bottom part of the fowl. Now we are seeing all of them bottom up, attacking this from a fire brigade, very unstrategic, less tactical approach. Why should you lock down an area that has absolutely no contact? Will you lock down Adamawa State, the entire state, in the Mobi Plateau and the places of Koma? What relationship do they have? When there is no, it is not even going to be possible in an arithmetic way for Corona to get there because they have no contact. Why will you want to lock down Edo State totally, for example, if the graph of the increase is so low in comparison with where it was, taking into consideration that outside of Lagosians and maybe those of Igbo extraction, we are the most widely traveled persons of Nigerian extraction. So if we have been able to come up with a mechanism, with a mechanics that has been able to make it still 22, in spite of the fact that we were more ready to attack the virus than even Lagos, where we have one of the original 5 test centers across the country, where the governor is carrying out day-to-day, door-to-door valuation and test it by force. And we are still 22.
Okay.
When as a month ago,
okay,
when Nigeria was 111,
okay,
111, we were
okay.
7 or 9. Today, Nigeria is approaching 2,000. We are still 22. So we have to understand this so that we don't press the panic button when the panic button needs not be pressed.
Okay, Dr. Obaseki.
What I want to say, yes, ma'am.
Okay,
yes, sir.
I want to quickly come in here because time is not our friend. So, 2 quick questions as we start to wrap things up. The very first one, Dwight Eisenhower, former president of America, said this. He said, a country that values privileges over virtue will very soon lose both. Do you think that's the case of what is happening already in Nigeria? Because it looks as though that are privileged are the ones that are still moving around and spreading this disease. Real quickly, I also want you to comment on what is happening in Edo State as regards the Chief of Staff. And thirdly, real quickly, can this be the great leveler? Walter Schneider wrote about this, Francis Fukuyama wrote about this, about epidemic being the great social leveler. Is this going to be the great social leveler as we start to wrap things up?
Yes, sir. Quickly, the man who wrote from Canada over privileges, God bless him, but I hope the ruling class are listening so that someday, very soon, we don't fall on them on the streets and begin to decimate them as they've decimated the nation. And as for my chief of staff, the young man has said these are the reasons. He didn't give it on principle. But the state is not at the behest of any one person. And the young man that has been appointed in his stead is one that, in fact, somebody wrote on the Edo, one of the major Edo platforms, it's a brand new day and a brand new dawn. And I think that maybe this is one of the projectiles that will shoot the government of my elder brother, Godwin Obaseki, to greater heights, because the young man who has been appointed has the pedigree. And we all believe that with him sitting behind our governor, we are sure and we know that the state is obviously in more safe hands than it used to be. That aside. Then this one you just spoke about him. I want to say this clearly without mincing words. Nigeria is sitting on a keg of gunpowder, a social implosion that, if not properly handled head-on now, may not leave Nigeria the kind of Nigeria it presently is. That one, you don't need a magnifying glass, you don't need a telescope, you don't need a microscope to see how would I put it, the coming conflagration. And this is as a result of the inability of leadership to lead. In fact, a friend once said, our leaders have dove into misleaders. I think they've always been.
Very quickly, before we go, Dr. Pedro, I would just like to know your take on the governor did come out to say that his administration is going to be hinged on making sure that the economic stability of Edo State is at point. Now, if we're looking at a place like this where COVID-19 is spreading, what should be the focus, the economic focus of the governor to make sure that the economic status of Edo State is up and running even during this?
No, that is what is going down right now. Apart from because he's been forcing some of us to go into agrarian enterprise. There is economic activity going on in Benin as we so speak.
Thank you so much.
What we are just increasing is, please, if you have to buy and sell, kindly wear a face mask.
Right, thank you so much.
When you finish buying and selling,
thank you so much. I'd like to say a very big thank you to you, Dr. Pedro Obaseki, and happy birthday once again.